Welcome back, friends. We are here again with our Slaying the Sacred Cow video series, and I have Greg here again. He's going to stay with us through the whole series, and then maybe some.
We'll see.
We'll see if he likes me that much.
I might be a little inflammatory at times, so we'll see if y'all still want me around.
Yeah. So what are we talking about today?
Power corrupts is the sacred cow today.
Power corrupts. Okay, so in the church, I have heard that, power is not something I should seek after. Right? I should turn the other cheek. I should be humble. I should, the first shall be last.
And the last shall be first. Yeah.
Type of thing, right?
Yeah. So
why is this a sacred cow that power corrupts? It sounds like that's the right thing to say.
It can, and this gets a little bit into how is the church under attack from the enemy to lead us astray. That's the whole goal, right? The enemy wants to lead the church astray, and so what it does is it will do one of two things. To deceive, to deceive effectively, you have to either have enough truth in it that it sounds right. So there's enough truth in there that enough of it is verifiable and the lie is snuck in there with the truth. Or in a nuanced context, you exaggerate an element of truth to be bigger than it actually is. So that way it leads you to wrong conclusions from a true principle. So that's what we're dealing with here with power. So you've heard the term probably that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Nobody has absolute power but God, so that's not verifiable that absolute power corrupts absolutely. Right? So let's remove that part. That's why it's not in the title of the video. But power corrupting, what you're saying is, man, when someone gets power, it changes people. It changes who they are, right? And they become corrupt.
It changes the person who has the power.
Right. But what is power?
That's a good question.
Right? Is power just when you have people who follow you? Is that power?
I think, to me, power is the ability to change something.
Yes.
Right? To affect change.
Yes. Power is your ability, or anyone's ability, to affect change on your environment. That's what power is. Power is not good or bad. Power is just a tool. And it's a tool God uses, by the way.
It's a lot of power.
So
right?
here's what's really egregious. You ready? If absolute power corrupts absolutely, then God is corrupt.
I guess someone could argue that we're only stating that truth about mankind.
What man has absolute power?
Yeah.
There's only one being that has absolute power.
Right.
So again, that's where you have truth exaggerated, right, with the word absolute. And now Satan is using the church to fling to give God some flack, to put a little egg on his face. Say, look, your own people are basically calling you corrupt.
Wow, that kind of hits home.
Yeah.
I do feel like a lot of times when we talk about these sacred cows, it really does come down to balance.
Yes.
Right? That we take these truths and under Satan's influence, and we have taken them a little bit too far. And that's really what the Pharisees did, right? We talked about the Sabbath, right? God says, rest on the Sabbath, keep it holy, and they took it too far.
Yep.
So, and I don't want to get into that because that's going to...
And you've already covered it.
Rabbit hole, right? But, so really, let's talk about, okay, power isn't necessarily bad or good. And I think that's a truth that all of us can get behind. Right. I think we've seen negative power, and we've seen positive power. We've seen power being used for good to change the world. So I don't think anyone's going to argue with that. Okay, so how do you see, like, what I mentioned them a little bit, but in the Bible, how do you see us taking, like, why does the church say that power is corrupt? Where's that teaching come from?
Right. So if we go back to power, the definition of power is just that it's your ability to impact your environment, to affect it, to change it. Then if you have less power, you have less at your disposal to affect your environment. So what you'll see, people have seen transformations, right? But my argument is that power does not corrupt. Power allows you the freedom to be who you already were. So if you can affect your environment, and you were a bad person, but you did not have a lot of money, say, right? Or you didn't have muscles, as if you're a man, especially, you go to the gym a lot, you change that fact, you get a lot of muscles, you might be more of a bully, whereas before you had to be nice in order to survive. What was inside you was not kindness, it was that you had no ability to be anything but kind, because kindness was your survival strategy. Mm. And now that you have muscles, you can stand up for yourself, or you have money, you can stand up for yourself, you can throw lawyers at people, you don't have to be kind anymore to survive. Who you were didn't change, but your ability to move in the world as you see fit broadened, and who more of who you were came out. Is that a transformation, or is that your heart was bad to begin with? Just nobody saw.
So you're saying when we say, oh, power's corrupt because look at all these examples of people who became powerful and used it for bad, you're saying the church blames the bad actions on the power, yes. And you're saying, no, that person had bad intentions the whole time. And I don't want to negate the fact that we all go through changes in life, right? It doesn't mean you're always a bad person. But your point is that the power itself did not do the corrupting.
It did not.
It enabled, or it gave the ability to the person to act out what they already wanted to act out.
Right. And it's the same thing as blaming the weapon for the murder.
Right. Okay.
Right. And it doesn't matter what weapon it is. It could be a rock. But if you bash someone's head in with a rock, it's not the rock's fault.
Right. We don't condemn the rock and say rocks are bad. We should get rid of all rocks.
Because a weapon is power. It broadens your ability to enact change on your environment. And if you want that person to not exist anymore, you can do that more easily with a weapon. So it broadens your ability to affect change. And the gun is the ultimate individual example of that, because it doesn't matter how big you are or how strong you are. The number of people that can use a gun to affect change on somebody else, we'll say, is much higher than a rock. So a gun is sort of the pinnacle here. But that aside, power also comes sort of spiritually or metaphysically in the fact that power is also in the form of support. Right? Your ability to affect change on your environment would include your ability to manipulate or inspire others to greatness or destruction.
Okay, so we shifted from, so
I'm broadening the definition of power
right
now,
and I think
so that I can answer the Bible example.
Got it. All right. So I think we've all tracked with you so far, right? Like we understand that Scripture has been, these verses in the Bible, right? Matthew 5:39, which says turn the other cheek. Yep. Matthew 5:5, which says, the meek will inherit the earth. All of these verses, while true, we are not saying they're not true.
And I want to dig into those in this video.
Okay.
Each one of them.
Okay.
But we don't have to do that right now.
But what we're saying is the church has probably taken, and I just pause here and just say, when I say the church,
yeah,
I'm not talking, I'm talking very generalistic, right? Not all churches teach this. Not all Christians believe this.
There's always exceptions.
Right. So,
but
in general, our experience has been, and we think it's relatable experience, that the church downplays power.
And so I want to add to that and say that church, it's a combination, right? If you think the church is not under attack, and I mean whatever denomination you are, your denomination is likely under attack. It's not that he just attacks the others, he attacks all of them. He wants the name of God to be mocked by the church. That's his ideal scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think he wants God to bring his judgment down on his bride, my opinion.
Hmm.
If he could make that happen, that would delight him. That would make his day. That would make his century.
Right. It's a big win.
So it's very naive to believe the church is not under attack and constantly under attempted influence by the devil and his cohorts. So I want to say that first. Your church specifically is under attack, or it might already be in line with what he wants it to be, which part of what we're talking about today, no power equals impotence. If he can make Christians useless, that's what he wants. Or
the majority of Christians are useless, and so the person that is in power, he can infiltrate, right?
Right.
But I do, again, I'm sorry, I just want to pause here and just say that we are not anti-church.
No.
We firmly believe that the church is God's plan for the earth. And you should go to church. You should be involved in your church.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is our churches are continually under attack. And so we have to be discerning. So this video series is just helping us as believers to ask questions.
Yeah.
Ask
that's
questions.
What we talked about in the last video.
Right. Ask questions.
The last video was talking about a lot about groupthink.
Yeah.
And breaking away. And the fact is there's a lot of well-meaning people that have spread this. It's like the deception got in there, but they thought it was right and they spread it out of goodwill. I'm not saying your pastor is demon-possessed. I'm not saying that he's a false teacher. I'm saying he might be repeating things from false teachers. That's part of how this spreads. I don't think there's as many. We can talk about that. There's only so many demons. There's not more demons being born, right? There's only a finite number, and they have to exist all over the world and in fact change all over the world. And so the more that they can get us into the cycle of spreading it amongst ourselves, the easier their job is. So we need to be aware, take every thought captive, and break away from groupthink, because groupthink encourages these lies and deceptive things to go about. We need to be having the courage to stand up and say, hey, this has bothered me for years. Can we just talk about it? You can't be emotional about it. You can't be saying it in anger or trying to hurt someone. But if you stand up and you're like, I just want to know the truth. And then if they respond badly, and if they, worst case scenario, want to kick you out, you get ostracized from the church. Worst case scenario, if your goal is to find the truth, you can stand on that. You have solid footing underneath you, because God always rewards truth seekers with truth. He always, you might be suffering in his name. If you're seeking the truth, Jesus is the truth. So you're seeking to bring that about. To confess means to tell the truth. Then what you're doing is definitely sanctioned by God. If you're genuinely seeking truth, not to be right, not to justify how you feel, but you're seeking what's right despite those things, God definitely is behind that every time. Every time.
So we're encouraging you to ask questions, discover for yourself. We're not going to cover this topic thoroughly, right?
We can't. It's
impossible.
Too in-depth.
Yeah. Okay. So you were telling an example about power, and power is not good or bad. It's how it's used. It brings out what is really truly in our heart when we develop power. But you mentioned impotence.
Yeah.
Right? So let's talk about that a little bit. Why is this swinging all the way to the side of no one should have any power? We should just sit and, let God do everything. Why is that dangerous? Why does Satan want us to buy into that?
Well, if Satan can convince you that you should not have the power to affect your environment, or those in your environment, for good or bad. He can convince you to sit on the sidelines and do nothing.
Mm.
Well, that puts you in a position where God can't use you, right? If you want to be used by God, you have to follow the path of being used by God, which means that when he calls you for a little thing, you need to answer the call, because that thing is going to prepare you for the next thing. You have David in the Bible who God didn't just send him against Goliath out of nowhere, right? And look at how David answered that call, by the way. He answered it boldly. It doesn't even say that he stopped and asked God if he could take down Goliath.
You're right.
He declared it. He was like, who's this guy? Like, why are all of you shaking in your boots? Do you not know who we serve? And he's making fun of who we serve.
Yeah.
Like, no, I'm not standing for this. He was angry. And he said, justice must be done. And he was in a position where God could use him for God's vengeance for what Goliath said. So he went and he got some stones and he killed Goliath. I have some questions. Do you think that David didn't know how to use a sling?
David absolutely knew how to use a sling.
How did he learn how to use a sling?
Lots and lots of practice.
Yes. Do you think Goliath was the first thing he took down with a sling? Living thing?
No.
Absolutely not.
In fact, he said, when the king questioned him, like, who are you? How are you going to go against this giant? He's like, I've taken down a bear. I've taken down a lion.
So he answered the call to rescue his sheep from lions and bears. We don't know how smooth that went. We don't know how much courage that took, but he answered the call. How understandable would it be for you to say, man, I just saw this lion come and grab this lamb and carry it off. It's in God's hands now. No, it's out of my hands, God. You got to take care of this and rescue the sheep. No, he took extreme responsibility for those sheep, more than most, which is why it stood out. And he went after that. And God called him to do that, like stepping stones, like rungs on a ladder to go up, because God had to strengthen his ability to fight.
So God always builds our ability of power in us. It doesn't happen overnight.
And he rewards faith in him. Do you think David was going after these things thinking like, I got this? Or do you think he was like, God, I'm after this. I'm upset over losing this sheep and I'm going to go do something about it. Please strengthen me.
Right. And that's a really good point, because I do think a lot of times we might hear let go and let God.
Yeah.
We hear, when we have a problem, what's the common thing for people to say? I'll pray for you. Trust the Lord. God is faithful. Those are all true things.
Yeah.
God is faithful. He absolutely calls us to trust him. But sometimes he also calls us to act. Sometimes he doesn't. Right?
Sometimes, yeah.
There's many verses. One I'm thinking of is in Psalm that says, sit quietly in the presence of God and wait patiently for him to act. So sometimes he doesn't want us to take any action. But today we're talking about being ready to take the action when God calls us. And that's really what power is, being ready.
Doesn't it feel safe to be in a position where you know you're not going to be called to speak truth?
Oh, wow. You just went right there.
I did.
Yeah.
To sit at home and be so out of practice on speaking truth that when someone really needs to hear it, it's like, man, I can't tell him that. Like, I'm not ready. He probably won't even hear it anyways. Like, all I'll do is hurt this relationship, which is not founded on truth if that's what you're doing. It's instead founded on maybe complacency. Maybe you make each other feel better by backing each other up. You think like, no, a good friend supports. Support is more important than truth. I'm sorry, there is no support without truth. None. You can even have a united front in front of others, but between you, I don't care what relationship it is, father, son, husband, wife, friends, doesn't matter. All of it, if it's not founded on truth, it's not of God, right? It's literally anti-Jesus, because Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And you also are out of practice in declaring truth. David was in this army camp full of soldiers 2 or 3 times his age.
Mm-hmm.
And the way he spoke with such boldness, the way he spoke truth was so compelling that the king offered him his armor.
Mm-hmm.
And just imagine, what did this king have to witness in order to be like, man, I'm behind you. How can I support you, a shepherd boy?
A teenager.
A teenager.
Yeah.
Think of the way he must have spoke. God was in his words because he was confessing truth, and Jesus is truth. That's power. Do not abdicate your power for comfort. Don't do that, because that comfort comes with a price, and you won't want to pay it one day.
Yeah, we definitely have to do a video. I think it's actually on our list of false peace, right? So
False peace, yeah.
So you mentioned one way. Like, I loved how we were talking about David, right? That's a great example, but I want to know what this all means to me today, you know, in today's world. And that was one example you gave where it takes power that you have practiced with God to be able to stand up and speak truth.
Yep.
Because like we talked about last video, you may be the only one speaking it, right? 300 other people are saying something different. And truth is a powerful weapon against Satan.
Yeah.
Satan hates truth.
Yeah.
So are there any other ways that you want to share where we can use power, or where maybe Satan doesn't want us to use power in the church? Or and again, these examples aren't necessarily just for church.
No,
right? They can be used throughout our lives, but we're focusing on ways that the devil deceives us in church, or ways that devil deceives the church.
Well, we touched on this in the last video too. Look, the church is made up of individuals.
Yes.
If each individual is not speaking truth, then you don't have a church that speaks truth. So it starts at the bottom with the individual.
Right.
This is why grassroots movements are so powerful, because what happens is you have a grassroots movement that resonates with people at the bottom level, and then it's from the bottom up, and it's powerful and it's effective, and lots of people try to imitate it and force it to happen because of how effective it is. And those are the ones that fail because they're false. They're not resonating with people organically. And so, same thing is true in church. If we want change to happen, it starts with you. You're important to this. You're telling of the truth as you see it. Number one, everyone around you benefits, even if they wouldn't say so. They benefit because they now have access to something they didn't before, to information that they may not have been able to have before. And they may hate that. There may be resulting conflict from that, but this is where you have to practice telling the truth in the face of conflict. Because if you don't, then you're running from truth in the face of conflict. And you would rather have peace in the moment than to tell the truth. The problem is, now you're a slave to peace. Now you can't tell the truth even if you want to. And your mind remembers. And your mind is like, well, I didn't tell the truth, and it kept a fight from happening. So that's a good strategy to avoid fights. But now your whole life is centered around avoiding fights. At some point, the price for that peace will be too high.
So we kind of switched. I feel like we took the concept of power and said, okay, power's neither good or bad, but what good power looks like in the church, one of the things that it might look like is telling the truth in a difficult situation.
Yes. So
and I think it's important. I'm just going to pause you real quick right now, because I think it's important that we note there's a right way to tell truth and there's a wrong way to tell truth.
Yes.
Right? So that's a
Yes.
question you have to ask and work through the Lord with.
Mhm.
What's in your heart when you're getting ready to speak this truth.
It's just telling the truth in love. That's the
Telling
right
the
way.
truth in love is the right way. So
if you are telling the truth, I've been in situations where it was really emotionally charged and I was trying to tell the truth in love, but I ended up just telling the truth because my emotions took over and overrode what I was trying to hold on to in my mind as right. And I ended up just telling the truth without love because there was just no focusing on trying to do it right. And I would argue that's better than not telling the truth. A lot of people are like, no, don't. If you can't tell the truth in love, don't tell the truth. Be silent. That's exactly what Satan wants, because telling the truth is a muscle. You have to work that muscle for it to be strong. When it's strong enough, then you can consistently tell the truth in love. So I actually don't want to warn people to sacrifice truth when you can't tell it in love. Sometimes you have to work that muscle.
That's a whole nother conversation.
Sorry.
I feel like, right?
It's still
definitely relevant.
We're talking about expanding your ability to affect change in your environment. Nothing does that better than telling the truth, more consistently than the truth.
Right.
Right?
And I absolutely agree with that. And I think we all tell the truth not in love. We all fall to that, right? That's very common.
There's also power to be used for evil. So I would argue another form of power is eyesight, except it's not literally your eyes. I'm talking about your perception. If you can see who people are, for example, you can see that a brother in Christ is hurting, or maybe it's someone that's been living out of their car for a few days and you notice, like maybe they smell bad. You could totally use that to shame them and get them out of your church because you don't want your church to become more like them, and you don't. Or you could use it to say, hey, do you like tell me what's going on? Are you doing okay? You don't look okay. Like, is there something I can do? That takes bravery, by the way. That takes courage to do, because what you fear happening is that they're going to yell at you.
Or they're going to be hurt or offended.
Right.
Yeah.
But the fact is, when you do that, you're telling them the truth. Hey, you don't look so good. That's the truth. Can I help you? You're offering help, which is from your heart, and you're telling the truth of your heart. They know what you're thinking in that way. They know, like, if they were in your position, they would not probably talk to them. And that's been their lived experience oftentimes, is I get ignored on the street all the time. So by going and talking to them, you're showing the truth of your heart, which is probably going to confuse them. I've had people be like, why are you being nice to me? Like, why are you talking to me? You know, and they'll be kind of mad about it because they don't expect that and they think that you're tricking them. Do not lose heart. They need kindness. They need the love of God. And it's your job to be in a position where God can use you. But if you have no capacity to tell the truth, you are positioned badly for God to use you. And He has to basically work a miracle just to even be able to use you at all. Do you want Him to have to do that every time? Or do you want to be positioned to be used maximally by God? This is why increasing your power as much as possible is important. But you're doing it to be of service. If your perception is good, you have the power to do good and evil with that. Because on the other hand, the flip side of that coin is you're able to see somebody who needs help and you're going to be able to use them for your benefit. And that's bad. That's not Christian.
And I want to point out too, it's all about the heart motive, right? Because I can say the same words to that person in need. I can say, hey, you know, you look like you're struggling. Can I help you? Because I want to look good.
Yeah.
I want to put another badge on my, collar.
Yeah.
Or because I truly and sincerely want to help that person. So God sees our hearts. right? God sees our heart's motives. We can't judge other people's hearts.
So here's an easy way to tell. We can judge. We're called to judge each other and hold each other accountable. Don't forget.
True.
Right? But what you'll notice, for example, in a scenario like that is how public are they making it? Are they shouting it to the church? Are they telling all their friends of what they got to do for the Lord? No, you received your reward right there. Your reward was that instant gratification of everyone around you being like, wow, good job. If you're content with that, go ahead, man. But I would rather God reward me. So what I'm, on the other hand, like if they just take them aside, they're in the back. What if they sneak them into the kitchen during service and make sure they're fed, where there's not a lot of people around and you can't show them off, right? Yeah. In what ways are people exercising their power for themselves versus for others?
Yeah.
You can't do both. It doesn't work.
But I think sometimes it may be hard to determine. But anyway.
It can be hard to determine, but you shouldn't not try.
Understood. So we've talked about telling the truth. We've talked about using power to perceive. And these are ways that we can use it for good.
Yes.
Is there any other way that we can use power for good that you want to talk about?
There's one more, and I want there's others, but they're all really nuanced. But there's one more big one: capacity for violence. Is violence bad?
In the church?
Would the church say violence is bad? Is wrong?
Oh.
Would the Bible say violence is wrong?
Well, that's a tough question because well, I'm going to talk through it,
yes,
right?
I want you to.
Because normally...
Sorry, I get sassy on this one.
Normally we say violence in general, the umbrella word is bad, right? But there were a lot of instances in the Old Testament and the New Testament where violence was... Well, I don't know about the New Testament so much. I don't know that I can think of any in the New Testament off the top of my head, but
Jesus flipping tables?
Oh, okay. I guess that's violent. Yeah. He didn't actually hurt anybody that we know of.
He braided a whip and whipped people out of the temple.
I don't think so. I don't know. We'll check on that one for you. Anyway, long story short, what I was trying to say was that might be a loaded question. So I know you're going to share your thoughts on that.
I sure am. That's why I'm here.
Okay.
You may not want me back next week. Sorry. No. David, we just used that example, clearly used violence.
To kill somebody.
It was somebody who blasphemed God, right? But how many times did God call the Israelites to war? And often he did it in such a way that it was clearly God that gave them the victory.
Yes.
Clearly.
Yes.
Is God of the Old Testament a different God than the God of the New Testament?
No.
Interesting. So, sorry, I don't think I get sassy with this, but I tell you, I'm sorry.
I know.
No, but violence is a tool in your arsenal. So if you're a man especially, you're built by God, in my opinion, to be the protector and the provider, to set up your borders and protect them. And then God can use that capacity in a greater way, sometimes as part of an army, sometimes as part of a greater effort, in order to do good. So if you want to be used by God, man, what if, and I've seen videos of this happening, I've received training on this, if you have a church where you teach that nobody should carry guns or do violence, you are very susceptible to Satan convincing somebody to go into that church and shoot it up. And who can stop it? The greatest deterrent for that, I mean, you have security measures. If there's cameras in the building, that's a great deterrent. If there's people guarding the doors during the service, that's a great deterrent because they can't get in unseen, okay? But all of that implies that you're prepared. So if you look like you have security, but nobody's even carrying a gun, I would argue that's a lie. You're projecting power that you don't have. But if you have security in the building, you have people who are strategically placed that have concealed carry licenses, or depending on the state, but they're concealed carrying, and somebody starts shooting, it's only going to go so far, right? There's a stopgap.
Yeah.
God might use you to be the hero of your church and save some people because you're positioned that way, because you've learned how to shoot. You've gone through the paperwork, you've taken the classes, you've worked with a team in your church. But frankly, even if there's no team in your church and it's just you, God wanted David to have the capacity to commit violence. He built that up in him. That was not where he had no experience and suddenly God was like, here's a sling, go kill Goliath.
So I think you're using a very unfortunately relatable example in our world today.
Yeah.
But a very specific example to point out a wider concept,
a
wider principle that says, hey, sometimes the church might need to take action, and it might even appear extreme against threats to the church. And those threats aren't always a guy coming in with an AK-47. Sometimes the threat is a false teacher or a spirit of disunity or a spirit of gossip or a spirit of self-righteousness, right? And all of those instances, God's going to call somebody to exercise power.
Yes. And God's going to call them to put a stop to a bad change coming.
Right.
If someone is gossiping and you stand up and say, hey, don't do that. Don't gossip. Stop it. You could call them to be better. Be like, listen, you're better than that. You don't need to talk about how bad these people are. You are worthy by yourself. If you have been rescued by Christ and you're a Christian, you're a true Christian, you already are worthy. You don't need to compare yourselves to these people. You can call him to be better, right? But only if you've exercised this power. If you have no power and you're impotent, no one's going to respond to you because who are you, right?
And I know we talked about this a little bit, but I feel like when you do that, when we do that, when we speak truth, when we rise to the occasion, we actually do it in the power of God.
Yes.
God, the power that we have is then God sanctioned.
Yes.
And at the very least, God sanctioned, and perhaps even God given.
Yeah.
Right? I believe that when David went against Goliath, he went with his own experience and knowledge, as we already talked about, but I do also believe the Holy Spirit, right, used that. So
I think David was accurate with his sling, and I think God empowered him to be even more accurate in that moment.
I mean, the fact that the stone embedded into Goliath's brain with enough force.
Yes.
Right. So there was definitely a supernatural element to it.
Yeah, and I have no problem saying that. But again, if David hadn't gone after those lions and bears,
or practiced with his sling,
if he was a mediocre shepherd, he would never have become king of Israel. Period. How much of Israel being willing to follow David do you think stemmed from his killing Goliath?
Oh, almost all of it.
Yeah,
right.
But that's not where his legacy started. It started as a shepherd.
Right.
But nobody else saw it. That's just when it became evident to everybody. Your journey is important. It doesn't start from one event. It's already started. And if you, up to this point, have been shedding your power and hiding from it, you need to turn around. You need to, within your own life and in your own home, decide, I'm going to tell the truth. I'm going to tell the truth. And if I can't do it in love yet, I'll get there. But I'm going to start practicing telling the truth. It starts there. Telling the truth in love is a temperance of this practice. If you don't have the practice of telling the truth, you're not going to be able to tell the truth in love either.
True. I do just want to say, as we're learning how to tell the truth in love, we may have to have some confessing and apologizing
of ourselves,
apologizing, right? Back to the other person when we don't do a good job of it.
But it's better than doing nothing.
It is absolutely better than doing nothing. and
staying impotent
yeah.
and unusable by God because you're not positioned to be used by God.
And I know this isn't the purpose of this video, but I just have to say, because you and I both have had these experiences where we told the truth and it didn't end up like we wanted it to.
No.
And
No.
and that's not a sign that we did the wrong thing.
No.
Because that other person always has the opportunity to respond either with God or without God.
Yes.
Or with God or against God, I should say.
Yep.
So,
and sometimes you're just planting seeds and they're going to be really mad right now, but in 5 years,
yeah,
they might turn around. It might be that you're the reason they turn around.
Yeah. But when we talk about the church, so we talk about telling the truth, right? Being bold, telling the truth in love, asking questions, challenging.
Yeah.
We talked about if you have the gift of perception, using that to, God, what do you want me to do with this? Do you want me to take this step of boldness and minister to this person? I think the answer is probably always going to be yes.
I don't see when it would not be.
Yes. I don't see when it would be no.
I don't see how you'd be in that situation and saying not doing it wouldn't be just an excuse because you're too afraid.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some obscure example out there somewhere, but in
I
general,
would say
right?
If you're already practiced at telling the truth and you feel like God's like, hey, hold off. That's different.
Yes.
Because it's not based in your inability to tell truth because you already know how and you've been doing it for years. You know what I'm saying?
But that's a good point because sometimes God does stay our hand, right? Especially with truth telling. Sometimes He's like, not yet.
That's a really good segue into the meek shall inherit the earth.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Okay. The meek shall inherit the earth is talking about a gentleness. The word for meek is the same word that Jesus uses to describe Himself. You have both those passages there.
Yeah.
Do you want to just read them real quick?
Yeah. Oh boy. Okay, you're gonna make me put my glasses on. Yeah. So the meek will inherit the earth is Matthew 5:5. God blesses those who are humble, meek, gentle. There's different translations of that word. For they will inherit the whole earth. And then Jesus uses that about Himself in Matthew 11:29, and that verse is I'm going to start with verse 28. Jesus said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry a heavy burden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle." Same word for meek. I am meek at heart, and you will find rest for your soul. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So, if that word meant that you have no power, if being meek means that I'm always, I'm
Sitting on
the
sideline.
Yeah, I can't hurt a fly. I'm gonna just like hands off and
always
never
turn
confront.
the other cheek.
Yeah, always turn the other cheek. We'll get into that too. I don't see how Jesus could use that same word to describe Himself.
He couldn't.
He couldn't.
Because that wasn't who He was.
Right. What it does mean, Jesus had great capacity, the largest capacity to inflict harm of any man that ever lived.
Wow. That's a thought, yeah.
Yes. He had more ways to inflict His will on the world than anybody in history. And no Caesar, no king could come close to this man. And His meekness meant that He had the option to destroy, and He chose goodness. And He chose the better option. So if you're someone without power and you think you're being like Jesus, you're not. If you're someone who believes He's faithful, but you're unable to get another woman, you're just married to this one, and she's accepted you with whatever you got, whether it's money or appearance or anything, and you're sitting there thinking you're faithful when really it's just that nobody else would want you. Are you a faithful man? Or woman? Or are you just impotent?
Yeah.
Is that a virtue? Okay, if you're someone with a reputation for being unable to hurt a fly, it wouldn't hurt a fly, Like, no, he's just really nice. He's a nice guy. Where she's just super sweet. She's so loving. Okay, that's great. But if she's so averse to conflict that she can't act any other way, or he can't act any other way, it's survival. You're not like Jesus. Jesus was able to tear people apart with a word, and he chose love. Do you understand the difference? And so meek means those who have power but don't exercise it, really, unless God sanctions it.
So it all comes back down to what God wants. What does God want us to do in this situation?
Yeah. He wants you to tell the truth for sure. He wants you to honor his image in you. So the meek shall inherit the earth is also indicative of that Jesus was the most worthy to inherit the earth, and he shared his inheritance with us. So being like Jesus in that we're meek, we have power under control, we use it when appropriate, because sometimes it is appropriate for Jesus to use his power. And it's appropriate for us to use ours sometimes too.
And Jesus did he often spoke. He always spoke truth, and sometimes not nicely.
Sometimes
right?
not nicely. It wasn't about making them feel good in the moment.
Yes.
It was about, what do you need to hear right now? Now, Jesus was very good at telling what people needed to hear and when they needed to hear it. That's something we have to exercise, but we don't exercise it by staying silent out of fear. Learn to tell the truth.
All really good stuff. Okay.
I have one more verse I want to get to.
Oh, yes. Okay.
And that's the turn the other cheek verse.
Yes.
Let's read that.
Let's go back to Matthew 5, and that is in verse 39. I think I'll start with verse 38 again. You have heard that the law says the punishment must match the injury, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I say, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. Well, I heard that all the time growing up, right? In school, somebody's bullying you. The response I got from my God-fearing parents, and I love them dearly, was turn the other cheek.
Okay. Did Jesus always turn the other cheek?
Jesus did not always turn the other cheek, but sometimes he did.
Often he did. But there's a line. There's a line. He definitely did not turn the other cheek when it came to words. If the Pharisees tried to trap him, he didn't just let them trap him. If people were telling lies, he corrected the lies. He didn't turn the other cheek and submit to the lies.
No, he always told the truth, even if it meant offending someone. But this is talking about an enemy against you, right? Someone seeking to harm you.
No. No, it's seeking, harm, not necessarily physically, because a slap is not intended to cause damage.
No, but it says, do not resist an evil person. Oh, we might get into a little bit of a disagreement, and we only have 10 minutes.
Okay. If that were true, were the people desecrating the temple that Jesus flipped tables at evil?
Yes, they were evil.
Did he resist them?
Well, I don't know that they were seeking to harm him, but he definitely went after them. He was actually the antagonist, I would say, in that situation.
What about any time that a mob wanted to kill him and it wasn't his time yet? Did he just let them have their way with him?
No.
No, he didn't. So what I'm saying is this gets exaggerated and taken too far. What is a slap? Is a slap intended to injure you?
No.
No. What's it for?
I guess to get a point across, or humiliation.
Humiliation. And that's how I know it. If somebody slaps me, especially in public, it's like you are after my reputation and you're trying to get a rise out of me. The slap is meant to enrage me. What's the response?
Resisting.
Turn the other cheek.
Resisting the rage.
Because you're so sure of who you are, especially if you tell the truth. If you tell the truth all the time, you become very familiar with who you are and comfortable with who you are.
You might be familiar with people slapping you too.
You might be. You might be. And if they do, what happens is the act of turning the other cheek shows you're so confident in who you are and what you've done that they can't shake you.
I really wasn't sure where you were going with that.
Yeah.
But I agree with that because, I agree with that because of everything you said.
Mm-hmm.
But I also agree with it because, and we have to be careful when we look at the Sermon on the Mount, because we have to understand the culture and the background of the Sermon on the Mount.
Mm-hmm.
The Sermon on the Mount was preached to Jewish people who grew up with laws.
Mm-hmm.
Laws after 630 of them, right? 600 and some. Lots.
Many, much more of them.
And so the Sermon on the Mount was not intended for Jesus to say, these are the truths that must be followed in every single solitary instance of your life.
Right.
The Sermon on the Mount, the goal of the Sermon on the Mount was to contrast the law that they grew up with the actual kingdom principle. And so that's what Jesus says here. You've heard the law says, oh, if someone attacks you, goes after you, steal, whatever, you have every right for retribution.
Yes.
You can absolutely go after them. That's what the law said. And he says, no, you don't necessarily have a right to go after retribution.
And what did he say? He said, I have not come to remove the law, but to fulfill it.
Absolutely. So this law was, an extended law that man had created around the law of God. Right. So I loved your answer. Thank you. I wasn't sure where you were going with it, but it also,
we never are, right?
I know, but it absolutely aligns with the purpose of the Sermon on the Mount. And I agree with you that verse, turn the other cheek, has been, in my experience, my personal experience, has been taken out of context a lot and used a lot
with good intention too.
With good intention.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But it doesn't change that it's deception anyways.
Yes. With good intention, but it has been used a lot of times to allow for evil to happen and go unanswered. Mm-hmm. In the case where if I was bullied at school, when I was bullied at school, right, that went unanswered. And what did that teach me? That taught me that I wasn't important enough, or I wasn't worthy enough, or God didn't think I was worthy enough to be protected, for that evil to be addressed.
Right.
All right. Anything else before we wrap up that you really wanted to share about this topic?
One more thing. If you are someone that is not practiced at conflict resolution and telling the truth and being brave, I want you to start asking, what would David do? David was so bold. Study his life as a king. He was just a truth teller to such a degree that his boldness was often, it got him in as much trouble as it did produce good, but only with people who did not love the truth. And
wow, yes.
I mean, I will tell you that I relate to David a lot, and in the desire to live life right and stop evil people from disrupting that in myself and other people. And a bully at school is a really good example of a little Goliath. So what would David have done? David would have spoken boldly as a start. And then he would have done something about it. Now, am I advocating violence? I'm going to let all of you decide between you and God, what you think God is going to allow you to do, and what you think God sanctioned even in David, who was a man after God's own heart. And that's all I have to say.
Wow, you're going to leave us on a cliffhanger. Okay. I love it. I love it. That's what this series is all about,
Yes.
right? You asking those tough questions. We can't tell you what to do. God needs to tell you what to do, right? The scriptures need to lead you.
Yeah.
All right. So thanks, everybody.
Yes.
I hope you found this beneficial.
Thank you for having me on.
You're going to be a staple, whether you like it or not. So thank
Whether
you.
you
for,
like it or not, too.
Thanks for joining me. And I think, again, our takeaway is ask questions, ask God questions, seek truth, not just what you want to hear, what's convenient to you.
And declare the truth.
And declare the truth. Ooh, there you go.
Yes.
Seek truth and declare the truth. We got to get t-shirts or something made up. That's a good one. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.